Racing is coming back to the Rock. NASCAR is coming back to Rockingham Speedway this April. David Hyatt from Track Enterprises is here on Paradise in the Pines. Welcome to Paradise in the Pines, a podcast about the people, places, and stories that make this the home of American golf. Brought to you by the Pinehurst, Southern Pines, Aberdeen Area Convention and Visitors Bureau. And welcome to Paradise in the Pines. We're joined today by David Hyatt from Track Enterprises. David, welcome to Paradise in the Pines.
Thanks for having me. Are you kidding? This is great.
You know what? Got to be honest off the top here for our viewers. David and I go way back. We go back to the late 90s covering NASCAR. You used to work for Motor Racing Network. You're executive producer. I remember I did that for 3 years. I don't know how some of those guys do it. 40 weekends a year, all over the country. We'll get into that a little bit, but that's your background. We'll talk about the 90s and NASCAR and really the heyday of NASCAR at that time.
Absolutely. A lot of growth going on back then. And spent a lot of time here in Rockingham during that time. So that's marries right up to what we're talking about today.
So now fast forward about 25, 27 years, you work for Track Enterprises. How'd you get involved with getting racing back to the Rock?
So I got to be on the fun end of the deal, I'll call it. A lot of the hard work was already done when I came on board. Bob Sargent, who operates Track Enterprises out of Macon, Illinois. Dan Lovenheim, who owns the property at the Speedway now, lives up in Raleigh. They were able to come together on a rental agreement where Track Enterprises would bring the race, NASCAR events, the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series, NASCAR Xfinity Series, and the ARCA Series back to Rockingham. And somewhere in the midst of once they got their deal done and the dates got announced, I got a call. Hey, would you like to be a part of bringing this back? We need someone who's got some experience in the sport, knows the area very well, and would be interested in helping us bring it back to life. And, of course, having a great history here, both professionally and as a kid for myself, I grew up going to races here. I didn't grow up here, but I grew up coming down here for two races with my dad. So for me, it was very nostalgic and very much something I wanted to be a part of. So they put the deal together, and then I get to be part of executing it. So it's kind of the best of both worlds for me.
What was it like? I know how I felt when I first went back. I moved to this area about 7 years ago and had a chance to go down there for a non-racing event, but just to see the racetrack and just, those memories come back, because I covered a number of races there, probably not as many as you did, but what was it like to kind of step foot back in and step back in time a little bit, if you will, at the Rock when you first came back?
So on one hand, it was a lot like it was when we left it.
Yeah.
I mean, the buildings were still in place, fencing, the garages were still there, some of the old signage, all still in place, and immediately flood of memories come back, and you start thinking about, I was here with this, or I remember when it snowed here and we were doing this, and this was one of those races we had to come to prepared for whatever kind of weather. It could rain, it could snow, it could be warm, it could be cold. We were always right after Daytona.
Right, exactly.
So really, right about now, today I'm in shirt sleeves on a beautiful blue sky day out here, but I know that
when racing was here, it was always rain and cold, like you said.
Exactly. So just a flood of memories came back, and it's like, wow, I remember this. And then I went up to our old broadcast booth, and it's like, it's still the same, So some of that hadn't changed, but some age, and I won't call it neglect, but just the fact that it hadn't been used, started to show through. And there had been some vandalism on the property, nothing that, it was not, the current owners hadn't done anything wrong with it, but they were already in the swing of replacing that stuff. And that's been cool too, to see all those guys hard at work, some of whom don't have a history around this racetrack, but bringing it back up to a standard that we can go racing here in a couple of months.
It's interesting over the last couple years because of COVID. North Wilkesboro got $18 million in COVID money. Rockingham Speedway got $9 million. So that allowed the owner, who was from Raleigh, made his fortune, if you will, on the bar entertainment area in Glenwood Avenue in Raleigh. So I think that obviously that was very instrumental, because seeing what happened in North Wilkesboro with the All-Star race, you think that kind of was instrumental in trying to say, hey, Rockingham should probably come back too.
I think it was very instrumental. I think the fact that Dan was able to get some of that money, as you mentioned, and put it to good use at the track. It wasn't, hey, we're just going to throw some landscaping up here and make it look pretty.
Right.
They actually went and put asphalt down on the track. So they repaved it, knowing first thing is the surface has to be ready to race. And here's a gentleman who is not someone who is a big race fan in the sense that he doesn't go to a lot of races, hasn't been there, but he invested in this property and had the mindfulness to think, if we're going to race here, we need to make it raceable.
Yep.
So rather than, even though you can use it as another entertainment complex, you can host a concert, you can have meetings and conventions there. There's plenty of meeting space and open space in the garage area and all to do that.
There's a road course there too, so they run a Classic 9 series there as well.
Exactly, and they do a lot of government driving training. There's military driving training that goes on the property. So it has a lot of use in that respect, but I think the foresight to go ahead and put some pavement down with really no hope of discussion of what was going on for future schedules was really insightful. And that was, I think, beneficial to being able to come back and say, hey, yes, Rockingham needs to come back because Wilkesboro's back. Look at the success. And then just a couple of weeks, just this past weekend, Bowman Gray. Yeah. I mean, so packed the place out and
sold out. Hopefully that's a harbinger of ticket sales for the ride.
Your lips to God's ears. I'm right on that. So absolutely.
So let's talk about back when we covered this sport. It was interesting because, Dale Earnhardt was, God rest his soul, was still alive, was fortunate enough to be in Victory Lane when he won the Daytona 500 in 1998. Jeff Gordon was in his heyday. It was just an awesome time to cover the sport. And then maybe you could say NASCAR lost its way a little bit, but they started building these mile-and-a-half cookie cutter. I remember being at California Speedway when it first opened, and then Las Vegas came along. Obviously, they want to grow the sport. They want to make it a national sport, get a different audience. But what do you think kind of led to this era now where, old is new again and getting back to the old school? And we talked about North Wilkesboro and Bowman Gray. Have you noticed being involved in the sport directly that there is a hunger for getting back to the nostalgic, getting back to the old school NASCAR, and even hear Dale Earnhardt on his podcast talk about going back to Rockingham?
Right. Well, I think that you hit the nail right on the head when you talk about the nostalgia of it. But I think more importantly, when you think about where NASCAR wants to take itself, we like to think, and certainly have promoted for years, that the best drivers in the world drive in NASCAR. Well, if all you're doing is driving on a mile-and-a-half track, turning left and going through a dogleg, can you really prove that's the case? Yeah, we can go fast, but if we can drive on a variety of tracks, and I think that's the key. Here we are in the America's home for golf, and I've always compared racing to golf on a lot of scales. At one level, when you go out to race or when you go out to play golf, yes, you're competing against other competitors, but you're first competing against the course.
Yeah.
You've got to know how to play the course, how to master the course, how to drive into the turns, where the groove is before you can race with someone else there. It's highly individualized. You have a driver who's making decisions. Yeah, people are talking to him in his ear, but he's got a pit crew who's going to service the car. But at the end of the day, he's got to make decisions on play when he's out there, just like a golfer when he talks to his caddy versus his crew chief or his spotter. So, and there's a lot more of those things that I can add to the list. But when you think about that and look at the fact that Rockingham is a very unique track, it's 1.017 miles. It's banked differently on both ends of the racetrack. 24, I think, on one end, 22 on the other end. And it's got a very unique style dog leg, not like your typical 1.5 bends in the front stretch. So it makes it a very different track from some of the other tracks. Darlington is approximately the same size, but it's shaped like an egg.
Yeah.
So again, drivers are coming in and they have to bring a different set of skills. They have to drive a racetrack very differently. And I think fans like that, whether it's a road course, a short track, a flat track, a high bank track.
Just like different golf courses,
exactly.
like you said.
Yeah. So I think that has a lot to do with why people want to come back to these, whether they're older venues or they're just different venues in some respects.
It's interesting is, first time since 2013, I believe NASCAR has raced at the Rock. I was wondering, the recent tire test, can you look back? Do you think any of these crew chiefs are looking back on notes from back then? Because you talk about, and people that are not savvy to racing, every racetrack is different. As you said, the setup is different, whether it be tire, track bar, air pressure, whatever you're using to adjust the car so it gets the most optimal speed so you can win the race. I mean, do you think there's any, or is it because the change and the complete resurfacing of that track that we're starting with a clean slate for a lot of these guys?
So I think it's a little both.
Yeah.
I think that those who have access to the old records and to how the cars were set up, first they have to make a translation of that to how the new car works. Because when you think about the technology that's come into the vehicle,
Totally different car.
Yeah, it's a totally different car. NASCAR has mandated a lot of change there. So I think it's a little both. Let's try this kind of setup if it's doable, if it's something that's similar to what was run here before. Let's try it. And then they start the A/B testing, changing pieces, parts, setup, moving it around, all to the ability they can do. The cool thing out of it is times turned on this test session we had a week or so ago are about 2 seconds faster than the track record.
Wow. Okay.
So now
I think the average speeds were like 162, 164, something like that.
Right. Yeah. And those were obviously unofficial times during test. But when you think at test time, they're turning those laps at those speeds and those times, I think we're in for, they found some setups. And as you know, these crew chiefs in particular can figure out how to get just a little more out of the car. So,
well, back in the day, they say, if you ain't cheating, you ain't trying.
That's right.
So maybe a little bit of that. We're not accusing anybody of anything. But,
no, never. We never do.
Talk about the it's interesting because we talk about asphalt composition and things like that. I think back in the day, everybody knows Darlington, you get a little bit of those shells in the asphalt that kind of chews up the tires a little bit. So the tire wear, you're talking like maybe 18 laps and you're slipping and sliding around. So I understand there was and you can even see it from like the grandstand section. You see the speckles. You don't see it from by the pit wall side, but on the other side, you see the kind of the speckles. There is some kind of abrasion in that asphalt, better than I think it was back in the day. But it'll be interesting to see the tire wear, and I'm sure guys learned a lot at the tire test as well.
Absolutely. So I think a couple of things play into this. Number one, the aggregate that went into the paving here came from the same quarries that was used in the prior paving of this racetrack. So we're in the Sandhills.
Yeah.
So you get a lot of that very gritty, sandy, sharp-edged cut that comes out of some of these quarries. So they use that in the aggregate for this paving. The difference, I think, between when we raced here before and now is the fact that you have given the track time to cure. That paving went down, 3 years ago now?
Yeah, 2 to 3 years ago, yeah.
Right. So there hasn't been any real competitive racing where a lot of heat's been in it and the tires are pushing the asphalt up the banking and creating ripples and bumps. It had time to settle in and cure really well. So what I suspect is that once we start practice and test come April and get guys qualifying, very quickly you're going to start seeing it eat up tires again.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that made this very popular among the competitors. If you could drive a loose race car, you could race better here.
Yeah.
There's not a competitor that I haven't talked to or a crew member who'd been here before who will tell you that they like to race at a better place. So many of them say, the racing here is always good. That's why I want to come here and race.
It was really cool at the test to hear some of the drivers, especially Jason Allgaier, the defending champion of the Xfinity Series, and Casey Kane, who hadn't raced here in a long time, was finally getting back into a race car, and he kind of reminisced about coming back to the Rock. How cool was it kind of listen to them? And I don't think it was any like PR speak like, hey, you need to say this. I think they honestly felt like this is truly like, this is where we need to be. This is where we need to race these races at these tracks that made history for NASCAR back in the day.
Very genuine. All of those guys grew up seeing racing here or had some exposure to it, knew what it did with race cars, have heard their other team members, those who've been around a little longer, whether they're crew chiefs or former drivers, talk about how great it was to race here, how competitive it was, who could drive it the best in terms of a loose race car or worn out tires or what have you. And they all want to put their skills to the test. They want to prove that's what a racer does. It's not just about getting to the finish line first. It's about how we get to the finish line because I did it better than you.
Right.
And I think that that's just a sense of pride for every guy that gets behind a wheel and wants to race a race car. So, I think it was very, very genuine coming from those two guys. And I think even more so as we get other drivers who are going to hop onto the entry list. I firmly believe, given the fact that NASCAR is allowing Cup drivers to come race in these events without holding against their allocation of other events that they can race in, will open the floodgates. I think we'll see a few other names that we don't know for sure yet. So I wish I could tell you, but it's just my...
We want to sell tickets too.
Absolutely. I wish I had a name I could throw out there, but it's just my speculation that you might see...
Dale Jr.?
I would love that. Again, from your lips to God's ears, there you go. So
the challenge has been laid
we
here.
love Dale Jr. to come. Heck, even if Jr. just came down to be a part of our
Yeah.
ceremonies, to drive the pace car, rub a mirror off of it on the exit of turn 2. So
Well, he doesn't live too far away.
That's
It's just
true.
A hop, skip, and a jump over to Lake Norman area. So, will there be another test? I mean, given this is new, will there be another test prior to April?
I doubt it.
Okay.
And mainly because of once the schedule gets underway, it's pretty much racing every
Yeah.
week. And right after Daytona, there's a big West Coast swing. And certainly any test or practice would have to be mandated by NASCAR.
Okay.
And as you know, when we were here a couple of weeks ago, we had a little bit of weather issue. So they extended
Yeah,
the test
that was cool.
to a second day. And I think that helped a lot of the teams really adjust even further, those who stayed and practiced a little bit more. Now, would we love to see another test and practice? Absolutely,
Yeah.
because we think these guys are going back and they're going to dial in a little more, because for the competitors, you got to remember that this race is also, this weekend also is the culmination of NASCAR's Triple Truck Challenge and the culmination of NASCAR Xfinity Series Dash for Cash. So it's the Triple Truck Challenge is a 3-race component that pays drivers a bonus for winning the race.
Okay.
The Dash for Cash in the Xfinity Series is a 4-race series that, based on how you finish and run, and if you win, there's a bonus for cash in there. So you're going to have some
So this
drivers.
is a critical race.
Very
Yeah.
critical, especially very critical early season race.
Yeah.
And there may be some fans who don't know about those challenges, but they're embedded in, and it brings better racing even to
yeah.
an already great facility.
You throw some dollars on the line, guys are going to be racing hard for it. For
That's
sure.
right. Yeah.
Let's talk about. Well, first of all, let me go back to the test. It was cool to see the fans in the turn 4 grandstand. I mean, there were probably a couple hundred that were there. At least it was open to the public. I'm sure you sold some tickets from that. I'm sure we'll see more. I think it's kind of a tighter window as far as people want to see what the weather's going to be like. It's Easter weekend.
Right.
It is peak golf season in the Sandhills and in the Pinehurst area. So, I know a lot of teams have booked their hotel, and I'm saying this as a tourism guy in Moore County. If you haven't booked your room and you're coming to this race, book it now, because rooms will be at a premium as we get closer to the Easter weekend. So hopefully the ticket sales went well, and I know there'll be more. We got a couple months to go. So how are ticket sales going at this point?
Yeah, so I'll remind you, get your tee time in the morning, come to the race in the afternoon, because our headline race is Friday. It's going to be a 4:00 start. On Saturday, we have 2 races. It's going to be the ARCA Series about 1:30 in the afternoon, but around 4:30 will be our North Carolina Education Lottery 250 will start, presented by Black's Tire.
Yep.
Black's Tire is our sponsor for the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series on Friday. And I think that we're going to have an opportunity for folks who want to take part in both worlds, certainly to be here. As far as ticket sales, I'll be like the typical promoter here. We have a few good seats left. Right. So you want to go to racetherock.com and get your tickets, just like you want to get your hotel rooms now. We are on a very good pace. I will tell you that for the test day, we actually had our single best ticket day, because people who actually went up into the stands, watched some of the testing, then came back down, and we had a ticket booth set up and started buying tickets.
Yeah.
And a combination of those ticket sales plus our online sales so far, since we put them on sale at the 1st of November, was our best single day.
Awesome.
So we feel very good about where tickets are heading and where we're pacing on those. I will say that obviously people buy tickets from the top down at a racetrack,
Yeah, you want to see.
from start-finish line out. So we're already starting to see that pattern of a V, in our grandstands,
Yeah.
where it's starting to work its way out, and that's exciting. I have actually gone on one day and actually saw the online as people were buying seats disappearing,
really?
off the map. So it's really cool. So I would urge everyone to go early and take a look at that if you plan to come. I mean, you can come as cheaply as $35 for a general admission ticket on Friday.
That's great.
And we know we're very competitive in our weekend pricing. $80 for 2 days, reserved seating, and 3 races.
Is there a breakdown for kids under a certain age? Or
Under
anything?
12, if you're accompanied by an adult who has a ticket, then yes, that's free. So we can. We'd love to bring folks out at all ages for that, and we think that's obviously a great deal if you can bring your under 12 child for free, and you're paying $80 for 3 races over 2 days, and it's a reserved seat. Everything from row 9 up is reserved. Everything's
Okay.
the same price. So we we're excited about, we wish we had more seats to open because we really think it's moving that well. It's not sold out yet.
Yeah.
So when
what is capacity?
So we're at about roughly 20,000-ish. A few odd spaces here and there. When you factor in the suites, for example, we have a few suites left to sell if you're a company and you want to entertain either some customers or some employees or leaders or what have you. We have an opportunity for hospitality, both during the race and suite. And, we'll look at an opportunity for hospitality, like a pre-race hospitality before going out to your seats. That's available as well.
Okay.
But when you add everybody in, we feel like we're close to 25,000 that we can put in there for each day, factoring suites and general admission and reserve seats, just based on typical capacity that we have there. As you know, all of our seating is on the front stretch. We have some premium RV along where the backstretch grandstands used to be, looking back over the racetrack. So that's a great view, and it's a nice opportunity for someone who wants to bring their motorhome in and park and have their own comforts and place to hang out and with a really, really good view and a cool race in front of you, because you'll have everything at your disposal if you're sitting back there in one of those spots. So we think that about 25,000 is where that number, ultimately 20 to 25, and that's factoring in also probably getting the competitors there.
Yeah.
So when you look at how the traffic is going to line up and the volume of people.
NASCAR is always about accessibility to drivers.
Right.
I know you're concentrating on what's going on at the track, but Thursday night, Thunderfest is going to be going on in downtown Rockingham.
Yes.
So several drivers will be there, yet to be announced, but it's going to be a cool, party atmosphere. Talk about a little bit about what that's going to be like the night before we get this big race weekend going.
Yeah, that's going to be fantastic, and I know that's taking the place of some other events that have gone on, like a hauler parade and whatnot.
Yeah.
We're still looking at how we can add to that, but we will definitely be there, be a part of it. Prior to coming over to talk to you today, one of the folks I met with is the guy who's going to put all of our merchandise together. So the Return to the Rock merchandise is coming. Keep an eye on racetherock.com for that one as well. And we'll have that merchandise present at Thunderfest as well as at the racetrack. So people who want to sport a shirt and show off, or a cap, or whatever we have out there to do that, we just finalized that and getting it all together. But there are bands at Thunderfest. There are fun and games.
Marshall Tucker band's playing.
How about that?
That's awesome.
I remember, candidly, long time ago, seeing Marshall Tucker band, and it was one of the best concerts I'd ever seen. So personally, I'm excited about that. I may even bring my guitar and try to strum along.
I grew up in Norfolk, Virginia, where Joe Moore, and we'll talk about Joe Moore here in a little bit, but MRN Radio. I remember they used to have a Southern rock concert every year, and it was Molly Hatchet, Outlaws, Marshall Tucker, Leonard Skinner. It was also, when I saw Marshall Tucker, I was like, oh, I had flashbacks. And but yeah, it's going to be an awesome. That's the Thursday night, and the racing will be Easter weekend, April 18th and 19th. I mentioned MRN Radio. Let's go reminisce a little bit for a few minutes.
Go flirt with disaster, Molly Hatchet.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. Absolutely. It's funny because I looked back. I looked at MRN Radio, and I was back in the day. So I know Dave was executive producer at MRN Radio. I worked for, it was then Street and Smith Productions, became NASCAR Images.
Right.
It's funny because at the test, I saw one of the producers there. She mentioned Scott Dallas and all these other people that I used to work with that still work in NASCAR. And I'm like, man, that's crazy. And so there were about 12 people there that I ran into that I remember from back in the late 90s when I covered the sport. But I remember MRN, the guys are always so good. They're so knowledgeable. It is the voice of NASCAR. It truly is. And so I remember guys like Winston Kelly and Jim Phillips and Joe Moore, and Winston Kelly, he's still heading up the NASCAR Hall of Fame in Charlotte, right?
He is. He's the executive director of the NASCAR Hall of Fame at Charlotte. He officially retired from MRN a couple of years ago, but he had cut his schedule back a little bit prior to that just because of his responsibilities at the NASCAR Hall of Fame. Here's a guy that he came out of college and went to work at Duke Energy and at MRN, and really kept those jobs for as long as he wanted to, an entire career at both places. And when the opportunity to honor the sport by running the Hall of Fame came up, I couldn't have chosen a better person to go there to do it, both in his knowledge of the sport, his history in the sport, and the background that he has in the, not just the sport, but in the region and with a lot of the people. So he was a great choice for the Charlotte Regional Visitors Authority to choose him to run the Hall of Fame when he got there. and everybody industry-wide was happy for him, even though we hated to see him cut back his schedule on MRN. But Winston is still plugging along and doing well with the Hall of Fame.
Get him down here to Rock. I'd love to see him down at Rockingham.
I've sent him a note. I said, hey, you got to come. We're going to find something for you to do, but you got to come. So I expect to see him here.
I think one thing that people that covered this sport back then love to hear stories about Dale Earnhardt. And I mentioned being honored enough to be at the Daytona 500 when he finally won it. I remember. I'll tell you a story. I remember working with Inside NASCAR, and it was a show I worked on with Ned Jarrett, who was the host of that show.
Yeah.
And I worked with Tyler Potter and Stephanie Boyd Durner. Great team. We had a great time covering these races. But I remember specifically when Teresa had commissioned at DEI, Dale Earnhardt Incorporated, to paint this mural. I can't remember the name of the artist, but there was a mural inside DEI. I'm sure it's still there today. It's called A Tribute to the Fans. And so we would go there every other week or so as it progressed, and so we could see how it was going, get some updated video. And almost every time Dale would walk out. And on the track, when he puts the glasses on, he's the intimidator. But when you saw him like that, one-on-one like this, one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet. Yeah. Just a good old boy from Kannapolis, North Carolina. And, he'd just talk to you about, hey, how's your family? He'd talk about, what's going on in his life that had nothing to do with racing. But truly just tell a story about Dale Earnhardt, just because I know there's a lot of race fans out there that, still love the guy, still reminisce about him and remember him. And it truly was, the lifeblood of that sport for a long time.
Oh, absolutely. And, to your point, he preferred talking not about racing. And if you connected with him on a not talking about racing level, whether you're talking about, he raised chickens, he had a big farm, he raised cattle.
Loved to hunt.
He did love to hunt, hunted on his own land, and also went out west and did some big game hunting with he and Richard Childress were, big friends doing that. But he was just a very down to earth guy. One of my favorite Dale Earnhardt stories has to do with, there were several of us kind of involved, but it happened here at Rockingham. And this was kind of before all the drivers would have motorhomes at the racetrack. Dale was one of the first guys to bring a motorhome to the racetrack. And that led to a few other people starting to bring them, including Mike Helton at NASCAR, who was, at that point, he was the vice president of competition for NASCAR. And he had brought his motorhome, and he had put a deal together with another camping group to bring some other trailers. And I was operating NASCAR Online at the time, what is now NASCAR.com. We called it NASCAR Online in the originating days. And when we did that, the gentleman who ran PR for what was then the Winston Cup Series at NASCAR was Kevin Triplett. And Kevin and I were friends both from work and from going to college together. So we would camp together, and there would be Mike, and there would be Gary Nelson, and there would be Kevin and David, and there would be a couple other NASCAR officials, David Hoots and Buster Alton, and guys all in the infield, and there'd be Dale Earnhardt, at the end of that line, and there were, like I said, maybe a dozen campers and motorhomes in the infield. Well, we would also always come up to the Pinehurst Resort because the races at the time were sponsored by GM Goodwrench and AC Delco, who were the primary sponsors for Earnhardt and Childress. And they would bring their employees for employee appreciation as part of their sponsorship deal, and they would do their annual employee awards at the Pinehurst.
Okay.
So being NASCAR, being part of the community, they would always invite us to come up and be a part of it.
Yeah.
So we'd drive up from the racetrack, we would have the dinner, Dale would present all the awards, do pictures with everybody who was getting an award for their service for the year or what have you, and then we would all head back. And as we started back to the racetrack, and this was not on US 1, but it was somewhere, I don't remember the route number or the highway name, but we would take kind of a back road down.
Highway 5, probably.
It was probably 5 or something, and then we'd get back over to the racetrack. And as we were leaving that evening, we were coming down the highway. I'm driving the car. I got drafted to drive the car, and I have Mike Helton, Gary Nelson, Kevin Triplett in the car with me.
You got drafted, or you were drafting?
Well, I got drafted by Mr. Earnhardt, the intimidator, came up behind, and Mr. Helton, as he would like to do, would say, "Don't let him get past us." So I said, okay, "It's Earnhardt." He said, "Yeah,
you're going to block Earnhardt.
Don't let him get past us." I'm like, "All right." So I went left. We were back and forth a little bit. Well, yeah. He intimidated me right out of the road.
Tapped you.
He went by me on the right. Yeah, so I mean, there's
Oh,
grass
my
and
gosh.
sand and gravel flying
Oh, my
up,
God.
and Mike Helton just looking at me, shaking his head, and I told you, no,
That's
don't
the
let him
original
get by.
pass on the grass.
I think it was, yeah. He was popular for that both on and off the racetrack.
That's a great story. Awesome stuff. Hey, race weekend, April 18th and 19th. Tell people again where you can get tickets, and let's sell it out.
Absolutely, racetherock.com. Go get your tickets, get all your information, everything you need to know about what's happening on the weekend, where it's going to be. If you want camping, we have dry camping, we have premium camping. So we have a lot of opportunity. We have free parking, plenty of it, and we have some reserve parking. If you want a quick egress, racetherock.com. Tickets start at $35, go only as high as $80. 3 races, 2 days for $80 in a reserve seat.
Can't beat that.
Yeah,
it's going to be a beautiful Easter weekend. It's going to be warm. It's not going to be cold like it used to be back in the day when we used to race in Rockingham in February. David Hyatt with Track Enterprise. Awesome seeing you again. It's been a long time. It's been great catching up these last couple of months, getting ready for this race.
And looking for more. This won't be the last you see of me.
Thanks so much, David.
Thank you,
Well,
Phil.
it's David Hyatt with Track Enterprises. RaceTheRock.com at Rockingham Speedway. Great to see NASCAR coming back to the Rock. If you want to learn more about tourism in Moore County and in the Sandhills, go to homeofgolf.com. To watch our videos, go to our YouTube channel, Home of American Golf. This has been Paradise in the Pines. For David Hyatt, I'm Phil Wers, and we'll see you next time.